Welcome back to the channel. Today, Middle-earth strategy battle game. So, I'm going to call this Lord of the Rings strategy battle game because that's what it's always been to me. But it is, yes, Middle-earth strategy battle game. This is the main rulebook, and as you can see, I've used this one a fair bit. This is probably my favorite game. It's the one I played the longest, and it's the one that got me into wargaming. I'm looking around at my painting table, and it's covered in Lord of the Rings things. So I've got some Knights of Dol Amroth here that I'm working on for my Gondor force, and some bits and pieces for a Rohan army. So yes, it's a big passion of mine. So I've been looking forward to making this video. If you don't know how these work, 5 good things, 3 things which are maybe, not my favorite parts, but not necessarily bad, but things either me or some people wouldn't really find that great. And one thing that makes the game special. So, number 1, all your miniatures are individuals. Now that doesn't mean you've got non-duplicate sculpts, as I'll show you here. That's as close to a duplicate sculpt as you're going to get. I'll find that later. It means that on the tabletop you don't have squads, you don't have groups, you don't have pairs. Everybody is an individual model. Some models are, I haven't got one here, but some models are sort of 2 to a base or something like that. But as a general rule, every model is individual. If you want to send all your swordsmen forward and all your archers can stay behind, or if you want to send all your swordsmen except one and maybe 2 archers go forward at the same time, don't know why you would, but you can. To me, the biggest time this comes up is normally, so you're advancing, you've got to pick an objective up and take it back to your table edge or something, and you're advancing and you push the enemy off the objective, and now you just need to get it back. So in games like 40k, you've got 2 units of 10 guardsmen, and you push the enemy off, and you need to get that objective back to your line. What do? Well, you get a whole squad of 10 guys to pick up one objective, while the other squad of 10 try to hold off the enemy, which is, not the greatest idea. Whereas in Lord of the Rings, you can have 1 or 2 guys pick up that objective and take it back, while the rest of your army holds and does a fighting retreat or keeps pushing. Maybe you've got more than one objective to get. So having the flexibility of single models is really cool. And I got into wargaming with this game, as I said. And so I was a bit strange when I came across this squad concept in games like 30k and Sharp Practice, but obviously that's very natural now. But single individual models is a really interesting way to play a non-tiny skirmish game. I should explain that. So Lord of the Rings is, I think 800 points is now the standard, maybe 700 points. So that's maybe 40 or 50 models a side. Obviously more if you're doing a bunch of goblins, less if you're doing a bunch of Knights of Dol Amroth or heavy cavalry of some kind, or elite warriors like Uruk-hai. So about 40 or 50 models a side, which is more than, like, it's not like Malifaux where you've got 6 or 7 models and you're trying to, every model is super detailed with all these different stats and special rules and stuff. I mean, it's each model is a copy of itself, but you're talking about a game about the same size as Sharp Practice, so about 40, 50, 60 men aside, but with a different way of controlling those men. Number 2, speaking of control, heroic actions. So heroes like, I don't have anything painted. Oh, here we go. Gandalf, for instance, have what's called might, and might lets you interrupt the sequence of play, basically. You can modify dice rolls with it. You can modify that hero's dice rolls with it, but probably the biggest thing it's used for is interrupting the sequence. So roll for priority. I lose the roll for priority. I really got my cavalry and I want to charge. I need to be able to charge with my cavalry before the enemy does anything. So I've got a hero there, I spend a point of might, do a heroic move, and he and everyone within 6 inches gets to move first. It's a very interesting mechanic that a lot of games don't seem to have. Some games have interruption systems, like I'm thinking of Sharp Practice, Chain of Command, that sort of thing, where eventually you can interrupt the game if you get enough cards or you get a Chain of Command dice. But with Lord of the Rings you can do it as long as you have heroes with might. and some heroes get a lot of mites. Most get very, very little, 2 or 3 points. So it's not like you're doing this every time, but the times you need to do it, it really does pay off. Enemies can, of course, counter that, and so that's where you get the whole heroes directing the flow of battle, and my captain versus your captain, who's got the better understanding of what's happening, who can get that cavalry charge in, or who can swamp them before they get their speed built up. Can my guys pull out before you catch them? So you've got 2 lines and you want to pull back one, and you decide to call a heroic move. If they haven't got a hero there, maybe your hero's just better than their troops and manage to get you guys out. So you can do other things. You can shoot first, you can fight, again with a hero and everyone in his combat. Might can be used for a couple of different things, but the heroic action is really an interesting one, especially compared to games like 40k where there's no Overwatch system. Bolt Action has its ambush system. There are a couple other games that have similar things, but Lord of the Rings has a sort of you can sort of dip your hand into the turn and take a little piece for yourself, which is kind of interesting. Number 3, it seamlessly does historical, with big air quotes, and points-based games. So the book on my shelf behind me, a big blue one there, not the big blue one on top, the big blue one on the shelf, is the Armies of Lord of the Rings. There's an Armies of the Hobbit as well. And it's got all the profiles, all the stats, and all the points values to do an army. But it's also got, in the back, I should have got it, but in the back it's got, if you want to do, I think it's the Deeping Wall, for which is the conflict with the elves at Helm's Deep. There's source books like War in Rohan, where you can actually do not only the entire Battle of Helm's Deep, but a little campaign that leads up to it. I think the first one was War in Gondor, or War of Gondor, War for Gondor or something, which is all about the war leading up to the Siege of Minas Tirith and the aftermath, which is really cool. And they come with legendary legions, which are basically, I think that's what they're called, where essentially you have to pick a list from a certain lot of figures. So, for example, I'm thinking of Theoden's Riders, I think it's called, which is Theoden, Aemir, Erkenbrand, Elfhelm, Eowyn, all the people who were at the charge at the Pelennor. But you can't take infantry in that list, it has to be all cavalry. But you get a bunch of bonuses alongside that. I'm thinking another one of Theodred's Riders. The opposite of that would be something like the Helm's Deep Legendary Legion, where you can't take any cavalry, but you have to take infantry for your Rohan army. There's a Rangers of Ithilien list, which is one of my favorites, which is Faramir, Damrod, Madril, the 2 new rangers that Forge World invented, leading a bunch of Rangers of Gondor with a few warriors of Minas Tirith. So you can have a whole army of just Rangers of Gondor, which you normally wouldn't be allowed to. So that's really cool. The Legendary Legions add that extra cool, historic, big air quotes, aspect of the game. You could do the scenarios from 21 years of source books. Battle Games in Middle-earth had 92 editions, 91, 92, I think it was 91 copies of Battle Games in Middle-earth come out, which you can find for sale for quite cheap or online, but I don't encourage that. They're packed full of scenarios. You can get the old source books, you can get the old White Dwarfs, they're full of scenarios for Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is the perfect game to, if you don't want to play points match games, you can always find a scenario to play for Lord of the Rings. Number 4, every force is unique. So, what do I mean by that? Well, Gondor, the Minas Tirith list has access to cavalry, and the Rohan list has access to cavalry. But the Minas Tirith cavalry are heavy armor with a shield and lance on a horse, whereas the Rohan cavalry are guys with bows and throwing spears on a horse, which is a very different way of playing cavalry. Tough, hard-hitting, very maneuverable, as you can't see my hand, very hit-and-run type tactics, very different. Rohan, you're almost penalized for taking infantry. You want to take basically all cavalry, but you'll need infantry models for when the cavalry, if the horse gets killed, which is another thing. What else? Moria obviously is a big spam list. You're not going to have a lot of elite infantry. Mordor you can really do what you like with. They've got heavy cavalry. They've got the Wild Riders, which is sort of impact cavalry, but not great skirmishers. You can take a bunch of Uruk-hai if you want. Easterlings are really good heavy infantry. Lots of spears, lots of pikes. They're great for making a big pike block, and they can actually maneuver in this pike block. They're very maneuverable. Whereas Uruk-hai can make a pike block, but they can't move very well. Once they start losing fights, they die quite quickly because they just get trapped. But they're rock hard and they hit much harder than the Easterlings do. So do you want a bunch of really hard-hitting, tough, strong Uruk-hai or well-drilled, disciplined Easterlings? Think of other things like the Hobbits. You can have an army from the Shire, and there's a whole source book, an old and a new source book recreating the entire campaign of leading up to the Battle of Bywater, which is the one where Merry, Pippin, Frodo and Sam come back to the Shire, find it overtaken by Sharky and his ruffians, and drive them off. So you can do a whole bunch of games around that, and you can collect a big army from the Shire. Obviously, no heavy cavalry in that army, but a lot of guys throwing stones and expert, really good, accurate archery, but very weak in combat, but very good at range. Elves like to hide a lot, very high fight value, so they're going to win a lot of their fights, but they're very squishy, so they can get killed. Anyway, you get the drift. You get my gist here, that a Rohan army and a Gondor army cannot be the same, because there's nothing in them that is the same. Even the heavy infantry versus light infantry, or even compare that to something like the Shire, where they're both light infantry, but it's ultra light infantry with literally no armor, using a shovel as a weapon, versus a guy with a bit of sort of chainmail and a helmet on with a shield, sort of thing. So it's every list is very unique, and if you want to play a certain way, you can find a list that plays that way. You can mold it to your desires a little bit, but generally the armies all play very individually, and you can use allies to modify it. But anyway, I'm getting a bit off topic here, but essentially, if you're looking for a game where it's like this faction plays this way, or in this kind of ways, and that really suits my playstyle, so I think I'll go with them. This is a great game. Number 5, Battle Companies and War of the Ring, which I understand are two different games, but the same miniatures can be used for all of them. I have him for something else. This Rohan Royal Guard can be used as a Rohan Royal Guard in Middle-earth strategy battle game, in Battle Companies, which is basically the Middle-earth strategy battle game, but with 7 figures. Or 6 figures, and you have a company of guys that can get up to a maximum of 15, get promoted, get wounded, it's a super skirmishy type game. It's very fun, and you can have a game in about 20 minutes. And clubs are perfect for this sort of thing. So you get a box of warriors. That's generally all you need for most factions. Some of them have a little weird stuff, but you get a plastic box. That should do you for most of it. And then you maybe need to buy a blister of Royal Guard or something. So you can sort of slowly build a force with Battle Companies. It's a lot of fun, and you can use your normal miniatures for it. And then you've got War of the Ring, which I've got a giant box, which I won't go and mess with now, full of Gondorians to paint up a War of the Ring, which started out as just a force of miniatures for strategy battle game. And then I thought, I'd like to play War of the Ring with this. And I had to do absolutely nothing to it. I could just take them, put them in the War of the Ring tray, play War of the Ring, take them out, and play Middle-earth strategy battle game in the same day. I think it's really cool that the models are so versatile. You have to worry about rebasing anything, that if you want to play all 3 games in one day, you can. The rules are also very similar across the 3 games. In fact, the Battle Companies and Middle-earth strategy battle game are the same rule set. So you're good with that. So if you've got people in your local group who say, I'm kind of only into big battles, I'm kind of only into small stuff, this is a perfect game, because it's all 3 of those at once. So the 3 things which are maybe not so great. Number 1, the games can be a little long. Middle-earth strategy battle games can be it can be a long game. Every fight has to be rolled individually. So if you've got 2 versus 1, one person rolls 2 dice, one person rolls 1 dice. And that's all right, but when you've got 17 2 versus 1s, or 25 1v1s, or a mix of both, suddenly you're rolling 25 dice offs. and if you win the dice off, you have to roll again to try and kill the person. It can take a long time to play this game. 600 to 800 points is generally about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, which is not too bad. But again, if you take like 6 or 7 Ents, that's going to be a quick game. If you take an all hero list, it'll be a quick game. If you take, 120 goblins, probably going to take a bit longer because you're going to move them all. If you take 120 goblins, it's going to take longer because you've got to move them all, and do all those individual combats. But they will die like flies, but you still have to kill them. So the game can tend to drag on a little bit, especially if you're doing something weird, which is fun, but some people don't like that. Number 2, it can be quite hard to get the miniatures sometimes. Slight sidetrack. I bought 18 Royal Guard off eBay, which is why this one's all green and weird, but I'll strip it later, who are missing their arms. Now, the reason I did this is because in the Royal Guard kit, you get the Royal Guardsman here in one piece, and then you get an arm with a sword and an arm with a spear, and you get 3 per kit. And so I bought 18 of the guys without arms, because then I would figure I would buy 18 of the guys with arms and use the spare arm to double my miniatures, essentially. And I managed to get 5 blisters, and I've been looking for the 6th for about 3 months now, and I haven't been able to find any Royal Guard on foot. I had a look. You can get about a third of the plastic boxes are in stock on the Games Workshop website, and this isn't some sort of like just now thing. It's been for years. It's been like this. They're not great at getting the Lord of the Rings back in stock. It's one of the least popular games they have. It's one of the least paid attention to. If we get 6 or 7 new miniatures a year, you're doing very, very well, which is fantastic because you used to get none. So they forgot about the game sort of between 2008 through 12. I think that's generally the period where the Games Workshop sort of forgot that it existed. So if you're looking for a game where it's like, oh, what's coming out this week? It's not going to be this one. And if you're like, I want to buy everything in one big go and get a whole army and build it all and paint it all in one day, yeah, good luck with that. eBay is going to be a good friend of yours. A lot of guys have bought Lord of the Rings armies in the past and getting rid of them. I love to buy eBay stuff. I bought a bunch of, well, these from Facebook, but I bought a bunch of Knights of Minas Tirith, the old metal ones, for very cheap because a guy had a bunch of horses with the ankles all snapped off and he had no use for them anymore. So I bought them for cheap, stripped the knights, glued the horses' ankles back on, and off I go with a bunch of Knights of Minas Tirith. If you want to get into this game, I would recommend eBay, secondhand sites, Facebook Marketplace, that sort of thing. I don't know what your local country has as a secondhand site. But yes, don't rely on the official channels to get your miniatures. Number 3, I said the lists are very unique. Some lists can be very limiting. I'm thinking particularly of the Rohan list, which is ironic because that's my favorite faction is Rohan. And the Rohan list essentially you have to take Theoden, which is annoying. I mean, I really don't like that because Theoden gives all of your Riders of Rohan and Royal Guard +1 fight. And fight 4, +1 fight, I won't get into it, but +1 fight is very good. You want to have +1 fight. Unfortunately, you don't always want to have Theoden in every list you ever run. Sometimes you want to do a Aemir army. Sometimes you want to have Theodred. Sometimes you want to have Erkenbrand's riders. You can do it, but you're being penalized almost. You're being penalized for basically not taking Theoden. I don't like that. Legendary Legions are a different matter. Some of them can get around this issue, but generally some of the lists can be a little restrictive. Thinking of other examples, Mordor, you pretty much have to take orcs. You can not take orcs, but you lose your army bonus essentially. Some lists are sort of almost designed, you should do it this way, and if you're not doing it this way, I mean, you can still have fun, but you're not going to make much out of it. So yeah, some of the lists, you can look at it and go, it's really cool to play this way, I just don't want to play this way forever. It's really nice, but sometimes I want to run Elfhelm instead of Theoden. Sometimes I want to run a Aemir on foot. A Rohan army on foot is essentially a worthless thing. unless you're using one of the legendary legions, because the cavalry gets so many bonuses that obviously Rohan's a cavalry faction. But if you're not running a cavalry army, it's almost like, well, what are you doing? Are you crazy? Minas Tirith is the foot army if you want to do it that way, or find another good army that can work like that. So yes, some of the lists can be a bit restrictive. What makes Lord of the Rings special? What could make the Lord of the Rings special? What could make the Lord of the Rings game, based on the Lord of the Rings books and the Lord of the Rings movies, a special game? I think it's the fact that it's based on the Lord of the Rings. The setting is extremely well known. People can look at that and go, that looks like Lord of the Rings. If you have friends who are not at all interested in wargaming, they can look at stuff and go, oh, I recognize that from the movie, or that's this such and such a character. I mean, Gandalf is quite visible. Oh, that's Gandalf. Or that looks like Gandalf. And you're like, well, it is. Lord of the Rings has a history to it longer than most other games. 40k goes back to, I think, the 80s or the 90s. Lord of the Rings goes back all the way to Tolkien when he was writing the books. So there's something there for everybody. If you hate the movies, you only want to look at the book stuff, you can do that. You can do that, absolutely. If you have no interest in the books, you only want to do the movie stuff, you can do the movie stuff. If you want to do the... anyway, I won't get down that rabbit hole, but there's a built fan base of Lord of the Rings that can quite easily come. A miniature gamer who is a fan of Lord of the Rings, which is a lot of people, I imagine. Why not just give it a go? Get a little force together. You can normally find somebody who plays at your local club, or at least has miniatures from 20 years ago, which are perfectly valid now. I mean, most of the miniatures came out in 2001, 2006, that sort of period there. The Riders of Rohan are the same kit from 2002. So your miniatures aren't out of date at all. In fact, some of them can be quite rare. Anyway, that's a tangent I don't need to go on. What makes it special is the fact that it is based on the Lord of the Rings. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this rule breakdown. If you have any rule sets you'd like to see, let me know. This has been Lord of the Rings. Again, it's my favorite game, and it hasn't changed much since it came out. So if you played it in the past and you're worried, oh, well, I might not remember everything, jump back in, because it's not changed much, if at all. So if you'd like to see War of the Ring, which I discussed, I'll put in the link below. I've got a video on War of the Ring, and I'm going to make a series on War of the Ring, basically breaking down how it works and what you'll need if you want to jump in. So if you're interested in the Lord of the Rings, keep following the channel. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day.